During World War One, the French had become top tier in terms of tank design and evolution, with their building of the Renault FT, the first ever production tank with a rotatable turret. So towards the end of World War One, they had bigger ambitions, the inception of the first ever Superheavy tanks. They envisioned colossal line-breaking tanks. This led to the creation of the mighty Char2C, the biggest tank that ever took to the field. So let's dive deeper into this mechanical monster. The initial conception for this type of tank was during the later stages of World War One, as the British first deployed tanks en masse to show the line-breaking capabilities, and other nations such as France then joined and perfected the technique. It became evident that stronger and more manoeuvrable tanks would be needed to achieve more effective breakthroughs that could lead to a total frontline collapse of the enemy. The French's first attempt at a heavy tank was the FCM-1A prototype. This beast, which was designed and produced in 1916 and finished in 1918, was a 40-ton heavy tank with a mighty 105mm main gun. It was a revolution in heavy tank design, although it didn't ever see the battlefield, as it came up short for what the French military required, but many lessons were learned that would then be applied to the Char2C. The mission statement for the Char2C was to be an unstoppable line breaker. It needed to fill certain criteria though. The first was to be able to handle rough terrain and obstacles. This was very important for France, as in major tank assaults in World War One, the majority of tanks were lost due to being stuck in poor terrain, which would either mean the crew would have to bail out, or this allowed enemy artillery, which was very prevalent, to then zoom in and destroy the targets. Secondly, it was to bring far thicker armour to the battlefield, so weapons such as anti-tank rifles and light field artillery pieces would not be able to put a dent in the tank. And the third point was to bring far more firepower than previous tanks, as bringing the big guns was one thing, but being able to effectively traverse and use them needed bigger, larger and turreted tanks. So the elephant in the room, the sheer size of the Char2C. It was quite frankly insane how big it was. Even in comparison to Superheavies of World War II, it was staggering. Its sheer size measured at a length of 10.27 metres, a width of 3 metres and a height of 4.10 metres, and it came in at 69 tonnes. To put this in comparison to the Jagdtiger, a German World War II super heavy that had the dimensions of 10.654 metres in length, that included the gun length though, 3.62 metres in width and 2.945 metres in height. This meant the Jagdtiger was only a bit wider than the Char2C but shorter in hull and height, yet it came 20 years later. It showed the grand scope of the Char2C and the massive effort it would be required to produce in the early 1920s, with technology far more limited in tank design. The armour of the Char2C was by modern standards nothing special, but for the early 1920s it was tremendous. It had 45mm of frontal armour, 22mm of side armour, 35mm of frontal turret armour, 22mm of rear turret armour, 30mm for the roof armour, and 10mm for the underbelly armour. Now this would render all anti-tank rifles of the time completely useless, and only the most powerful artillery pieces would be able to break through its armour, though high explosive rounds would be able to cripple the tank. There was an attempt to upgrade the Char2C's armour. This was named the Lorraine. It would have increased the front armour to 90mm, the side to 65mm, and the roof to 50mm. This occurred in 1939, which would have made it one of the heaviest armoured vehicles in the world just after the KV series. That was still in trials, but this would increase its weight to 75 tonnes, making it even heavier than a Jagdtiger. This upgrade would also make the tanks viable though for World War II, being far heavier armoured than anything the Germans had up until late 1941. Unfortunately, only one Char2C received this upgrade, and it is a massive miss for the French, because I think if all the Char2Cs had received this upgrade, they would have actually been viable for the early World War II battlefield. The Char2C needed to be heavily armed, as it would be required to fight in the worst situations, especially as it broke through the enemy lines. The standard Char2C had a 75mm main gun mounted in the front turret. It was a Cannon D75 model 1897 with a shortened barrel. This was a great main gun for the time, capable of firing high explosive anti-tank and armour-piercing high explosive rounds, giving it great flexibility in what targets it could engage. In the rear turret was an 8mm machine gun, which could repel infantry that may try to attack from the rear of the tanks, a very likely scenario as this was a breakthrough tank. It also had 3 more 8mm machine guns, with one in its front hull and 2 more to the front ends of each side of the tank. These were perfectly placed for trench sweeping, cutting down infantry in the trenches as the Char2C passed by. There was a different weapon loadout for the Char2C. This was called the Char2C Biz. Now this version of the tank had the 3 frontal 8mm machine guns removed and the frontal turret modified and replaced with the massive 155mm Schneider howitzer. Now this gun could wipe bunker positions off the map with its 44kg shells. It had access to high explosive smoke and poison gas rounds, truly making it a rolling war crime. I personally think this version of the Char2C was far better, weapon-wise, with it being a bunker buster fitting the tank's capabilities. This would have made the tank far more viable. Unfortunately, only one Char2C ever received this upgrade, and eventually that was taken off and it was returned to a standard Char2C loadout. The Char2C's mobility was a major concern for designers, as not only did it need to be able to keep a good pace as to ensure that when it broke through the enemy lines they had less time to reinforce and counterattack, but also to be able to effectively clear trenches and obstacles such as shell craters and debris. So to move this massive tank it required 2 large water-cooled V12 diesel engines delivering a combined 500 horsepower. This allowed the Char2C a max speed of only 7.5 miles per hour, though we know that when dealing with rough terrain this would be far lower. This meant the Char2C, even though fast in comparison to some of the slower World War I tanks, was still painfully slow, and in a breakthrough scenario would allow its enemies time to reinforce and regroup. And over time, when pushed to their limits, the engines did fail fairly regularly, most likely due to the immense strain on them from the 69-ton massive Char2C. The Char2C did excel in one part of its mobility trials. This was the task of trench crossing, as the fighting of the time was still envisioned to be trench-based, and the Char2C needed to be able to master all trenches in front of it. It achieved this through multiple smart pieces of design. First, its massive length being 10.27 metres, meaning even over the largest trenches it could keep contact with the ground well to avoid falling in or toppling over. It had a 60cm wide tracks that were very large and allowed it to have low ground pressure, which was great for the rough muddy terrain expected. It could also be fitted with a trench crossing tail on the exterior to aid in the crossing of the mammoth trenches which it was expected to traverse, and the largest trench it ever crossed was measured at 4.5 metres wide. That basically gave a tank ditch very little effect against the massive Char2C. It truly was the master of trench crossing. The crew needed to man this monster was 13 men. I believe this is even more than the massive multi-turreted T-35. The crew consisted of a driver, 4 machine gunners, a loader, a main gunner, a mechanic, and an electrician and an electrician's assistant and mechanical assistant in one. Though this would be different for the Char2C Biz as it lacked the 3MGs and had a smaller turret, so likely it would need less men. Even though this tank was huge, this is still a lot of people for a single tank and would likely be pretty cramped. And communication would have been tough with so many people to coordinate at once. But an upgrade in the 1920s did give them access to wireless intercom, which would have been a massive benefit for the crew. One odd thing to note about French tanks, even when they did upgrade to wireless radios, they still used hand signals and flags to communicate with other tanks. So even though the French embraced some technological aspects, others did not. One amazing feature that I've never heard of before was the use of the unique stroboscopic cupolas. These were located atop the turrets, which provided good visibility while also offering adequate protection against small arms fire. The cupolas had many vertical slits cut into the exterior section, with rectangular ports were housed in the interior section. The exterior section would rotate at 300 rotations per minute, giving the viewer adequate visibility and protection through the use of this optical trick. The cupolas could be also opened if needed. This is quite an eye-opening addition to the tank and shows how advanced the design was for the time. And I've never seen this on other tanks, so maybe other people have, so please do point them out. But it is really an interesting addition, and quite frankly, I thought it was amazing. Really, really cool. The production of the Char2Cs was not an easy road, with such a large and technologically advanced tank proving far more difficult to produce than previously thought, and multiple delays in key features being produced held the tank back, missing the initial delivery date of March 1919, where the first of the initial 300 were ordered and were expected to arrive. It would not be until 1921 that the first arrived, and by this time the order had been reduced to a lowly 10. This was a result of the French military command seeing the tank as missed its chance to shine as World War I was over, and the initial want for such a large trench crossing tank had now gone. And with advancing anti-tank technology and other countries producing new tanks, the Char2C lost its value. So the 10 that were delivered were to be an endangered species from the start. But how did the Char2Cs actually do on the battlefield? Well, a bit of a strange scenario, as even with their old age, being 18 years since their actual production, the weapons were very capable of cracking through the lightly armed German tanks, which also featured very little armour, to be fair. But the French High Command were worried about the Char2Cs being outmanoeuvred and captured by the Germans, and due to the Char2C's status as a bit of a king of tanks, it was seen as too potentially detrimental to morale to lose them. So of the 10 original Char2Cs, 2 were completely ruined, and 2 were also in a state of disrepair, so it only left 6 that were actually operational. These would be sent to the south for safety. So as they moved onto the railcars, which was also a nightmare due to their large size and weight, it required special railcars and 4 35-ton hydraulic jacks and 4 hours of intense labour, but they managed to get them on the railcars. But as they moved south, there was a major blockage. The Germans had attacked the rail line, and now they were stuck. So the crews realised there would be no chance for the Char2Cs to get to safety, and had to destroy their own tanks. They set the charges, but as they detonated, 1 charge completely failed, and 2 of the charges were ineffective, leaving 3 Char2Cs in decent condition. This allowed the Germans to capture 3 of these massive tanks, and they were then sent home as trophies of conquest. It's a massive shame that they sent them home, as I think our friend Major Alfred Becker could have turned these 3 Char2Cs into something quite useful for the Germans. But still, the fact that 3 of these mighty tanks were captured was a massive propaganda victory for the Germans, and a hit to France's national prestige. The Char2C truly was an inspiring design, ahead of its time in many ways, yet too late to the war when it would have been a true asset in. And when given a second chance for glory, this was stolen by the higher-ups in fear. Nevertheless, it still holds the title of the largest production tank ever deployed, and one of the heaviest as well, and truly showed the ability France once had as pioneers in military technology and innovation. It's a shame that no recording surviving tanks are available, though it was rumoured that one may be in Russia, though that is unlikely, as I think if the Russians had one, it would actually be at one of their major tank museums. But there's rumours that the reason they don't show it is because the French might demand for it to be sent back. But I think when it comes to World War II technology, like vehicles, I don't think the Russians would mind sending this back for museums, so probably just a rumour. But if there is one out there and anyone knows about one, please do tell, as I'd love to see one. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. It truly was a delight going into this tank. I never knew about it before playing Gates Front, the Mace mod. Saw this thing, I thought, no way, this is real. And it in fact is. And once again shows that France has a great history of tank building, which is very interesting. Anyway, you guys have a fantastic evening.